Hello, OFAD lads and lasses. Andrew here with a couple of notes before we begin today's show. First, the OFAD summer delivery is over. We're giving away a couple of copies of Pastor Sean Mathis's book, Is the Church Pro-Gay? We have notified the winners. If you entered, check your email. It might be you. If it's not you, we'd still recommend you picking up that book as it would be very helpful to you. Also, you may notice as we get into the topic today that we are discussing Donald Trump and whether Christians should vote for him, and we presented this as a discussion of a contest between him and Joe Biden. We recorded this a few days before President Joe Biden announced his decision to drop out of the race. It doesn't really change our analysis or conclusions. Kamala Harris is a part of that same administration, would likely do more of the same things if she were elected to be president, perhaps even greater intensification of those things that are problematic in Biden's administration and agenda. So just note that when we're talking about Biden, what we're saying does essentially apply to a possible Kamala Harris presidency as well. So with that, here is today's episode, Should Christians Vote for Donald Trump? Part 2.
Contend for the faith that was once for all delivered to the saints. In times of spiritual and moral chaos, it can be hard to discern truth from error and to apply it to all of life. God's word is not silent, and we don't have to be either. This is Once for All Delivered with Caleb Castro and Andrew Smith.
All this to get back to our purpose here. You know, we're not here to just do the news. We're not a political podcast per se. We're Christians, we're pastors, and we're taking up here the question, can or should Christians vote for Donald Trump this year in 2024?
Yeah, well, this isn't a new question. We could just say first.
We do this every time.
Yeah, we could do this every time. You know that old saying of voting for the lesser of two evils. Is that a legitimate question? At the time, in 2016, Andrew can elaborate on his own personal thoughts on this, but for me, I rejected or refused being put in the position of voting for a lesser of two evils. I thought that, voting my conscience according to what I believe was more in line with my doctrinal and confessional convictions. So I refused to go with either party of the bipartisan Republican or Democratic Party, and going with a very, very tiny third party, basically a distributionist party, the American Solidarity Party. This does end up becoming the question, though, right? You vote third party. Does that detract from one of the other two candidates? Are you throwing away your vote knowing that your personal conscientious vote of a third party, is that really doing anything? Is it worth it in voting your conscience now? Andrew, where were you at kind of in all that?
2016, I did similarly, though not the same. I couldn't bring myself then to support Trump. I went third party. I went for the Constitution Party. A guy named Darrell Castle was running under that ticket and was on the ballot in Wyoming, where I lived at the time. There's a lot of similar stuff. I didn't like his character. I didn't even really like some of his positions, which is why it's interesting we come back to this point again. Back then, he wasn't very good on issues like abortion and LGBT and things like that were very important to me. So he got elected in 2016 and then did better than I expected. And
same. When
2020 came around, I did vote for him, and then he lost.
Right. In stating then that, yes, we weren't always Trumpers. I mean, I was probably closer to a never Trumper. And again, just I didn't want to choose who I saw as a evil character. But this is a recurring issue in politics. You're always going to have, if you will, it seems like a lesser of two evils for the most part, or you're going to typically have. Never, for some people, you may not have your ideal choice, your ideal candidate. If you come to where we're at today, has Trump's character changed much? What are kind of some of his views? On one part, I can always say he seems to have gained some tact, even towards the end of his term in 2019 into 2020. He seems to be guarding his mouth a little bit more, and even on Twitter, yes, there was still some flaming rhetoric, but it definitely, I think, tapered off throughout his administration, especially in comparison to his first campaign. But what about his actual positions? We have already said he's soft on an abortion matter.
Yeah. He has at least articulated, particularly recently, a position on abortion that is not good. It's the one that the abortion pill should continue to be available, just as the Supreme Court recently decided. Now, that case was a little more complicated than that. I'm not saying it was a good decision by any stretch, but basically the issue was a group of pro-life doctors had sued to try to get the FDA approval of the abortion drug revoked. And the case was denied because it was denied that they had standing. So it wasn't really a question of the merits of the case, but who was bringing it. This to say that the issue, it does not fully or finally settle the issue. There is still a door open for other legislation, other court rulings that could potentially limit or ban abortion pills. And I think particularly post-Dobbs at the state level, I think there's opportunities to do that. That to say, it's not a good position that Trump and now J.D. Vance have taken. Again, this accounts for over 60% of abortions performed in America now. This has drawn the ire of a lot of the abortion abolitionists. Just a quick rundown on who they are. I think we've talked about them before, but it's been a while. So abortion abolitionists, as their name implies, they want nothing less than in the total abolition of abortion. They draw off of historical developments like the abolition of slavery and how it was essentially done all at once, and they say a similar thing should be sought and done concerning abortion. And so they generally, I'm generalizing because I know there's some variation, but they hold that it's wrong to support legislation that limits abortion but does not eliminate it altogether. Morally, they say that it's still being complicit in the evil of abortion. And then pragmatically, they say that it provides carve-outs in the law under which abortions can be done, so it makes it harder ultimately to abolish abortion. That's their stances on legislation, and so when it comes to candidates, they also reflect similar principles. They would oppose candidates generally who support any kind of exemptions, exceptional cases, even where abortion is allowed. So they've even come after things like rape and incest exceptions and 15-week heartbeat bans and stuff. And I will actually say, I admire their principles. I think in principle, they're right. Abortion is evil and should be outlawed, should be done away with at all levels. The issue here, anytime we are dealing with matters of the political, there is a constant pull and a constant struggle between idealism and pragmatism. Abortion abolitionism is a very idealistic position. It basically is aiming for the best possible outcome, the most good that could possibly done in the situation. Compare this over and against pragmatism of get what you can get, do the best you can do with what you have. I don't know. Before I go on, Caleb, do you have anything to say or add to that?
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily on abortion itself, but I think that's really well put of a matter between idealism and pragmatism. But I would imagine what, anticipating where we're going a little bit here, the real matter needs to come down to what are your principles. There's going to be some areas in politics, not saying this in doctrinal in a sense, in the church. I want to make that first a distinction. There are going to have to be certain aspects of a compromise when looking at a candidate. Are you going to never vote for someone because they do not match your ideals 100%? Where are your ideals rooted is the real matter. So you continue to wait around for that ideal person to come along. If that's the case, you're going to be very disappointed. There are none who are good. call no one good
Right.
but God. You're going to have to be waiting for Christ to return for the ideal candidate, unless you're going to be holding to a position that would think that, that political candidate is going to himself be a Messiah. Again, this anticipates kind of a little bit more where we need to be going, much less than what we're talking about with abortion. But this is just the nature of the issue itself. What are our principles, and how do we see our principles take effect or grow from just a tiny root and grow up in our civil government again?
Yeah.
That's the bigger issue here. Now, this is just to say on abortion, shall I abstain from voting for Trump because he is soft on abortion, or that he chose a running mate who is also soft on abortion? Okay. Show me how many of those in our political offices, whether at the state level, local level, whatever, who are really abolitionists of sorts, or who are consistently pro-life.
Yeah. There's a few, but there's not very many.
Point being, when you get into politics, especially in the broader and broader levels of society, you don't have many at all, especially at the highest levels, that hold to this view, to their shame.
Yeah. I suppose, to your question of do you not vote for anybody that doesn't hold to your ideals? Well, some do say yes. Some of our Presbyterian covenanter brethren are on principle dissenters. They won't vote. They won't support any candidates that are not a part of a properly Presbyterian and Reformed system of government. So that just means they essentially do not participate in the process at all. And I mean, I get it.
Yeah.
I can see the allure of it. And I'll just say, too, like even this election cycle, I mentioned I didn't vote for Trump in 16. I did in 20. I've actually gone back and forth on it a few times this go around, particularly in light of his recent new statements and positions on abortion, because, this is an issue that's very important to me. And I would like to see abortion gone and done away with. And now on this side of Dobbs, we actually have like a real opportunity to do that.
Right. Yeah.
But also the facts on the ground seem to indicate that that's not where things are going, at least not right now.
Right. And to a certain clarity in this, when I ask the question, do you just not vote at all?
Yeah.
And on the question of conscience, this is also why there's, to an extent, a matter of conscience here.
Yeah.
So this is not to say that you must vote for XYZ candidate, whether you hold to a, let's say a sphere sovereignty position or a escondido two kingdoms or a theonomist approach. I don't think in any of those positions that it should be said that, we bind the conscience of someone and say, you aren't a Christian if you do not vote for Trump. Or you aren't a Christian if you do not vote for Biden. You aren't a Christian and don't care about your country or politics or the Christian cause and its manifestation in this world if you do not participate and vote. I want to be clear on that. This is not to opt out of our duty or providing a solution, but I think that we'll take that up a little bit later here. I do think there's a position to take, but it's not in talking about voting for the individual.
Yeah.
That's not what we're looking at here. Perhaps moving from the abortion aspect, another thing that we could say is, aside from pro-life, Trump has been a supporter, or at least you could say in the very least agnostic on LGBT for years. Even going back into 2018, 2019, he was already making tweets, statements on his support of trans rights. He was selling LGBT merchandise for a time, right? And back in 2019. I think you can still find that merchandise.
I think he is this time around too, actually.
Yeah, and I think this is another pragmatic approach where he doesn't see it as a big enough issue to base his political reforms, especially where if you look at it, he's focusing a lot on, yes, border security, foreign policy, and in the economy, right? Those have always been kind of more of his interest, so much in comparison to use the term legislating morality in the individual and personal sense. And this is where we see, he's soft on abortion, right? He doesn't really care what the individual does in their private life, but don't make it affect the broader society. That seems to kind of be his general approach, though he is, of course, against DEI, like the diversity and equality and whatever they call it, right? Inclusion. Why? Well, because those things affect corporate policies. He seems to be actually somewhat consistent within his own internal position. We just put it this way. Donald Trump is a great Democratic candidate from the mid-90s to early 2000s.
Yeah, he's basically Bill Clinton retreaded.
Yep. For a lot of people, evangelical Christians today, they look at him as, being such a great conservative, but in quite a lot of the present Republican Party, they're really not, I guess you could say. They are the same temperament of the party line Democrats of yesteryear, with perhaps more interest in evangelical camp to continue to hold on to their votes. But what's happened is just that as the left, the liberals have their purpose and nature to progress rather than conserve, as liberalism has progressed in pushing the line, what was of the left 20, 30 years ago is pretty much now the conservatism of today. And this happened with a lot of moderates, those in the center, not wanting to take a stance one way or another, but to try to harmonize the parties. The goalposts have continuously just shifted. And this happens in many other institutions in society. It's not just politics per se. You see this in the church too, right? When there's a party that doesn't want to take a stance one way or another, and then you have the other two opposing sides wanting to conserve or remain orthodox, and the others wanting to progress and liberalize.
Yeah.
Those who are on the right don't gain the support that they needed from the moderates. The moderates, by not taking a stance with the right, ultimately let the left continue with their rhetoric and progress left.
So the net effect is everything moves left.
Yeah, right. So we shouldn't be very surprised at this, but we shouldn't maintain the illusion either that Trump is really a big conservative. And we have to remember he was a registered Democrat for pretty much the bulk of his life until, 2010, 2011?
I know he was talking about running as a Republican as early as 08.
08, okay.
But it wouldn't have been long before that.
So he was a Democrat for decades until there was a shift in the Democratic Party.
Yeah. Now, we've been talking a lot about Trump and the state of the Republicans and conservative politics, but we also should say here the corruption and the anti-Christian agenda of Biden and the Democrats and the mainstream media and the universities and such that are basically an extension of them cannot be understated. We've talked about this at length in many previous episodes, all the various places where we've seen LGBT, all the places we've seen DEI, all the places we've seen abortion being pushed without any restrictions. Biden's administration has aggressively pushed all these things. One of their biggest drums they beat is they want to restore Roe versus Wade via legislation. There is this rhetoric that we have talked about promoting violence, the cancellation and non-personing of political opponents, and all the ways this affects biblical Christians. Again, we've talked about it before. They prosecute pro-life protesters under the FACE Act. They prosecute their political opponents like Trump himself. Some even wonder, did they look the other way on purpose to expose Trump to security vulnerabilities? We are not in any way ignoring or excusing or downplaying just how bad the left is either. We'll get back to this in a little more when we get to our concluding thoughts, but I don't really view this as a choice between Trump and Biden. It's more of a choice between Trump and some form of abstaining or dissent.
Right, that's precisely it. Let's do this maybe for a moment then. Good, we want to point out we're not itself a political podcast, and want to point this towards here the bases of some of our principles. But first, perhaps in summary form, let's read from our confessions on this to kind of get where we're going. So if Andrew, you want to prepare the Westminster here in a moment, I'm going to pull up the Belgic Confession from the URCNA's edition of the Belgic Confession, because in Article 36, this concerns what we confess to believe concerning the civil government. I'm reading the URC's as this is what I subscribe to of itself. There is a revision that had taken place in this when it was originally written in the 16th century. It had articulated an establishment principle, and for transparency, I do hold more to an establishment principle overall. This meaning that there's a much more active role in the government, in the establishment itself, in propagating Christianity in society and actively suppressing evil, blasphemy, heresy, so on and so forth. Anyways, I'm going to read from this being more of a voluntarist principle, or at least something more towards a recognition of separation between church and state powers. Okay, so Belgic Confession, Article 36, the civil government. We believe that because of the depravity of the human race, so we just know it already, it starts with a recognition man is depraved. Just keep that in mind. Our good God has ordained kings, princes, and civil officers. He wants the world to be governed by laws and policies so that human lawlessness may be restrained and that everything may be conducted in good order among human beings. For that purpose, he has placed the sword in the hands of the government to punish evil people and protect the good. And being called in this manner to contribute to the advancement of a society that is pleasing to God, there's the purpose of a society and government, the civil rulers have the task, subject to God's law, of removing every obstacle to the preaching of the gospel and to every aspect of divine worship. They should do this while completely refraining from every tendency toward exercising absolute authority, and while functioning in the sphere entrusted to them with the means belonging to them. And here there was the substitution in those 3 paragraphs from the original, just noting where that occurred. They should do it in order that the word of God may have free course, the kingdom of Jesus Christ may make progress, and every anti-Christian power may be resisted. So that's one of the revised paragraphs. What was unrevised was the statement, for that purpose, he has placed the sword in the hands of the government to punish evil people and protect the good. Everything after that was the revision. Moreover, everyone, regardless of status, condition, or rank, must be subject to the government and pay taxes and hold its representatives in honor and respect, and obey them in all things that are not in conflict with God's word, praying for them that the Lord may be willing to lead them in all their ways, and that we may lead a peaceful and quiet life in all piety and decency. And on this matter, we denounce the Anabaptists, other anarchists, and in general, all those who want to reject the authorities and civil officers, and to subvert justice by introducing common ownership of goods and corrupting the moral order that God has established among human beings. I'll refrain from comment for a moment while, Andrew, if you want to go through the Westminster.
Okay, well, the Westminster has notably been revised here in the American edition. I'm OPC, so I'll read the American edition. I think we have gone through the unrevised before as well, so you could probably find that back in the archive somewhere. But this is chapter 23 of the Westminster as held to by the OPC and PCA and perhaps others, I don't know. But those are the ones I know about. 1. God, the supreme Lord and King of all the world, hath ordained civil magistrates to be under him over the people for his own glory and the public good, and to this end hath armed them with the power of the sword for the defense and encouragement of them that are good, and for the punishment of evildoers. 2. It is lawful for Christians to accept and execute the office of a magistrate, when called thereunto, in the managing whereof, as they ought especially to maintain piety, justice, and peace, according to the wholesome laws of each commonwealth. So, for that end, they may lawfully, now under the New Testament, wage war upon just and necessary occasion. 3, and this is the part that has been changed the most. Civil magistrates may not assume to themselves the administration of the word and sacraments, or the power of the keys of the kingdom of heaven, or in the least interfere in the matter, so I believe that's a typo in the edition I have here, in matters of faith. Yet as nursing fathers, it is the duty of civil magistrates to protect the church of our common Lord, without giving the pretense to any denomination of Christians above the rest, in such a manner that all ecclesiastical persons whatever shall enjoy the full, free, and unquestioned liberty of discharging every part of their sacred functions, without violence or danger. And as Jesus Christ hath appointed a regular government and discipline in his church, No law of any commonwealth should interfere with, let, or hinder the due exercise thereof among the voluntary members of any denomination of Christians. It's a lot of reading. I'm getting winded. According to their own profession and belief. It is the duty of civil magistrates to protect the person and good name of all their people in such an effectual manner as that no person be suffered, either upon pretense of religion or infidelity, to offer any indignity, violence, abuse, or injury to any other person whatsoever, and to take order that all religious and ecclesiastical assemblies be held without molestation or disturbance. 4, last one, it is the duty of people to pray for magistrates, to honor their persons, to pay them tribute or other dues, to obey their lawful commands, and to be subject to their authority for conscience's sake. Infidelity or difference in religion doth not make void the magistrate's just and legal authority, nor free the people from their due obedience to them, from which ecclesiastical persons are not exempted. Much less hath the Pope any power and jurisdiction over them in their dominions, or over any of their people, and least of all to deprive them of their dominions or lives, if he shall judge them to be heretics, or upon any other pretense whatsoever.
So I'll give you a break from talking for a moment while you catch your breath. So I'll start with a couple statements there. Now, as I often do, a preface. One, we were not going to do a full treatment of this, just to kind of just make a note that Andrew and I have been planning on doing a discussion on the nature of the doctrine of the lesser magistrate and the question of, can you overthrow tyrants? When is that permissible to disobey rulers? So we're not going to touch on that here, lest we end up with another 2 or 3 hours of broadcast at this time.
It's also not really
pertinent,
germane to the current question.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's not really what we're looking at here. If there's a question of, why should I vote for the lesser of two evils? If those are my only choices. I do want to at least just make the statement of, one, we are not really looking at the matter of voting for a person. We're looking at the matter of voting for the policies that they're putting forward. And if that is the case, now we noted in terms of Trump with the LGBT views and his abortion views, there could be a couple others maybe that some could bring up. But in general, are his other policies against the things that we have read a moment ago? For example, are his economic policies or his foreign policies or his border policies, do they go against the advancement of a society that is pleasing to God? Do they place obstacles to the preaching of the gospel and for divine worship? In enforcement of the border, as an example, is he exercising the sword in prohibiting those who should not be entering the country from entering the country, especially from countries where many have been convicted felons released from high security prisons? Just bringing up some examples here. Why would we vote for a lesser of two evils? It could be answered as, do you want less evil? Do you want there to be a greater restraint of evils going on? Because if we were to compare with the policies we have seen in the past 4 years, has the sword been exercised by America's present administration? Has Biden's administration exercised the sword? And is it protecting the citizens when we've been seeing an increase in murder at the hands of many immigrants?
Yeah.
Has this present administration, Biden's administration, has it contributed really to the advancement of a society that is pleasing God? Has it placed obstacles to the preaching of the gospel and for divine worship?
Yeah. I think you could look just at, the LGBT issue. We've talked about on previous episodes how I knew an evangelist at my university who for a time got banned from campus under the kind of DEI type policies that the Biden administration has furthered. Things of that sort. Those don't seem to be the kind of policies that a Trump administration did prioritize when it was around the first time or would prioritize again next time. Yeah, just in general, And I recognize, like, we look at this and you can definitely see that neither is going to measure up to this ideal. So again, we're back to the question of idealism versus pragmatism. And if you want to be unbending on your ideals, I guess that's your prerogative. And then you're a dissenter, and many people are.
I do want to be careful here. Like I said, I do think there's something in a matter of conscience here that we want to say that, like, yes, you should be voting your conscience. In terms of a third party, so I want to recognize that at least first, but at risk of perhaps crossing the line, I guess, I don't know. I'll always say, what is the definition of insanity?
Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results.
Right. If you've been voting third party for the past several elections, have you seen a third party candidate win yet? No.
Or even come close.
No, not even close. Again, that's your prerogative to vote your conscience.
Or to not vote.
Which
would have a roughly similar effect.
Right. That's the thing. Frankly, I might even say it might even be better to not vote than voting third party at this point. Again, as a previous third party person, I don't mean to elevate myself on this, but just at least as a consideration that's come to my mind of we're not seeing the net effect of voting a third party. But also just to take that conclusion to another end, we have to remember that in Germany in the 30s, Hitler had come to power by being voted in as a third party. The third party, and just because his position seemed all right. And he did have some church backing, actually. It's not going to be exactly the answer.
The last time there was a third party that rose to power in the U.S. was during the Civil War.
Yeah.
So, a very chaotic and violent time in our history.
Yeah. I would love to see a good third party rise up and break the bipartisanism, personally. I think there's pros and cons. Arguments can be made one way or another for a bipartisan system versus having multiple parties. I would be glad to see a third party come up, if it is especially the right third party, as opposed to a libertarian party or a green party, Tea Party, so on and so forth. There's others I think that would be far better. My third party is probably going to look different than yours, right, Andrew? But
yeah,
this is the nature of an idealism versus a pragmatism. What I think we should be looking at here, above anything, though, wherever you land, is having a principle. Having principles to stand on, even if that means you abstain from voting upon principle. But in terms of having those principles being applied in the government, that's the question, really. Is it a matter of a lesser of two evils? Again, I would ask, how can we best curb that which is greater evil? As it is, these past 4 years, we have seen a rather staggering increase of evils and open perversiveness in the United States in a very short amount of time. And to the point where, yes, there has been a huge shift in American evangelical churches to embracing LGBT, to softening on abortion. It's not just our political leaders. It's not just Vance and Trump. Okay, the U.S. churches and professing evangelicals are shifting left to pretty much identifying as closer to a Democratic Party. The Democratic parties of yesteryear, even, like we said. We should not be basing our beliefs upon our political stances, but informing our political stances according to our biblical beliefs. We have to keep that the primary thing. In other words, our political principles are such because they are derived from a greater worldview, namely a scriptural worldview. The matter is, how do we see that worldview take root in a society? Well, if we want to see it in a certain political or bureaucratic way, then we want to vote for a party that is gradually applying those things. In other words, where there's a better, to use lack of a better term, a better chance, better opportunity for what more aligns with our Christian worldviews to take root and grow. Can real Christian principles, can the moral law better flourish in the Biden administration, in a liberal progressive administration, in a communistic dictatorship in another country or this one? Can those principles, are they able to thrive and grow and influence the civil government and society at large? Can they work in this administration or would they work better in another administration that, yes, they waffle on LGBT and abortion? Would our principles on anti-abortion and anti-LGBT, would they be better received and have hope for political reform and societal reform in Trump's administration?
Yeah. Basically, we read from our confessional statements earlier, and we recognize that there is not a realistically achievable scenario at this point where we're going to get all of this. How can we get the most and the best of this that we can is really what I think the question comes down to. And so I guess we should probably now take our stab at answering the question.
Yeah. I mean, and I could just put in short on my thought is really, if you abstain from voting, whether you abstain for voting, whether you vote for Trump or whatever, if you vote third party, let's point the finger here at our churches and ourselves. What are we doing to apply Christian principles in our houses, in what we watch or what we read, what we listen to? Are we applying truly Christian thought, Christian beliefs and principles? Are we adhering to the moral law in our own homes? Or do we waffle on those things? What about in our kids' schools, if you have them go to a school or in homeschooling? What about in your churches? Do we only talk about the society or how bad this world is, or do we also go out and serve in our communities? Do we speak with our district representatives or senators and our governors? Do we speak with our mayors, our town treasurers, or do we only just complain about how bad things are? Are we going to our state capitals and speaking to the representatives that gather there? Again, king of prefacing, let's consider those things first, I think, when we're talking about how do we apply our views and principles. We need to point the fingers at ourselves, and whether we vote one way or another, are we following what we believe? Do we have a harmony between or consistency between our word, our thoughts, and our deed? And now I think, do we vote Trump?
Well, I guess I'll do a last little bit of prefacing. Because why not?
This is why we have 6-hour episodes now.
We don't, but we might get there yet.
But
But anyway, yeah, I think you raised a good point. It was one I had on my list here too. In which administration? Well, first off, let me say, I'm already making some concession to pragmatism, and that, as I've said before in previous episodes, I'm not a big fan of democracy in its current form. I believe that our nation is in general a wicked people, that no matter who's in charge is finding ways to govern themselves into deeper wickedness. But there are degrees of that. And there are significant differences in the degrees of that we get under these two different administrations. Because as Caleb said, we're not really voting for a man. We're voting for policies. We're voting for an administration. We are essentially voting for a government, an entire package deal. Even as, like we've said, that Trump and Vance have said some things about abortion that are bad. And again, I won't pretend for a moment that they're not bad. Is it still possible under such an administration that people who are more sound on the issue are going to get in there and be able to influence policy, influence actions? I mean, again, in 2016, I didn't support Trump in part because I didn't think he would do anything about abortion. And then Trump's policy record in his first term basically did more against abortion than any president that has lived in our lifetime. He appointed Supreme Court justices, overturned Roe versus Wade, made significant restrictions and limitations on abortion possible for the first time in over 50 years. That's nothing to sneeze at. So I realize it's bad what they're saying, but I think there might be practically some reasons to expect we may get better from them than what they are saying now. Now that, it's a shame that we have to assume that they're probably not being fully truthful. That's just, that's the way our politics go in this day. I think at the end of the day, if you're going to vote at all, And again, I can respect a position of dissent and just saying I'm not going to vote. But if you're going to vote, this is a binary choice. If you're being realistic in terms of you want to actually vote for a government that has a chance of taking power. You know, the next biggest threat this go around is RFK Jr. He doesn't even have ballot access in enough states to win. He has no way of getting to the 270 electoral votes needed to win. Also, he is to the left of Trump on pretty much everything except COVID. He did better. And that was one of Trump's major weaknesses, was his handling of COVID, but we don't need to get into that. Now, again, we cannot understate how hostile the Biden administration and its policies have been to Christians. Trump doesn't do all the things that we like, but it seems, at least in general, he's willing to put Christians in positions in his administration to listen to them and to somewhat at least cater to their wishes. And so for me, the bottom line is this is a choice between a deeply flawed administration, but one that will at least give some regard to Christians and not actively wield the power of the federal government against them. That is the choice in Trump. Or a completely morally bankrupt administration whose stances and policies seek the destruction of biblical Christianity in America. I think with all the other things we've documented on our show, recent current events, our shows again on LGBT issues and the things they're doing in rural America and all that. That's what the left is trying to do. They want to purge biblical Christianity from America. So it's hard. I don't love it. But at the end of the day, unless something majorly changes between now and then, I'm going to be voting for Trump again in 2024. I do think, to Caleb's point, we should be active on the local level. And as much as us or any like us have the opportunity to get involved in Trump's administration to influence his policy and personnel decisions in a better direction where he's weak, I think we can. I think we should. And we should hope and pray that we could get better than what has been, what they tell us they're going to do. But at the end of the day, again, I don't love it, but that's where I'm at. And like I said, unless something major changes, that's where I'm going to be.
Yeah, and I'm the same as Andrew on that, in terms of voting. Just to put it into the perspective here, even if Trump doesn't win, what do you do then? There should be a consistency either way. How can we extend Christian influence? How do we apply our Christian worldview, regardless of who is on the throne in our country, so to speak, regardless of which administration is in power? Either way, you should be getting involved in our local governments. There's a better likeliness that the Trump administration would listen to the advice, the counsel, the indictments of Christians, of Christian voices, much more than what we've been seeing with the Biden administration these past 4 years. And it's not even necessarily just Biden himself, but we have to remember who he's surrounded himself with, who have been acting as mouthpieces in these past several years. And not to go back onto that exact matter of the third commandment violation with Nancy Pelosi and Kamala Harris, but, her invoking the name, thank God that Trump is safe. Well, I don't quite think that Pelosi knows God. Is she likely to hear the counsel of Christians, to hear godly counsel? Maybe. But so far, the track record is not good. Her having once served in California, it's just, you have seen the fruits of California in the past couple decades here. It's not like California is actually devoid of Christians. Just saying, as a native Californian. We need to be thinking, how do we apply and encourage the adherence to the moral law of God in all places of society, one way or another, whether you vote Trump or Biden or abstain or third party. Let us be consistent, though, in our beliefs, and look to see them applied and encourage people to speak and to act accordingly.
Yeah. And really, I think we have a much greater chance of having much more impact on governments and on the world at the local, regional, state level. And yes, the federal elections matter, and we, as from what we've said here, we're planning to participate in them, but also to spend your energies where they're going to have the most good, which is probably going to, in the months and years to come, be closer to home. Another thing too, just, I guess, more pastoral guidance. We need to be praying for our country. These are some dark times in which we live. The fact that we were 1 inch of drift on a 150-yard rifle shot from waking up in a vastly different country in a world, and vastly different to the negative from even the dark situation we are in. First off, it ought to cause us to be thankful to God for the blessings we do have, even as we do face many troubles and difficulties. Could be a lot worse, and it almost did get a lot worse really fast. So we should be thankful for what we do have in our country, but also praying that this decline we are seeing, this slide into wickedness that we continue to see, might be reversed, that God might grant repentance to our leaders and to our citizens, that the word might go forth and do a new work in this land, because, ultimately God is sovereign, God is in control, as we said earlier. God is with and for his people, even in the dark days, and so, we can trust in him, and we should trust in him, and we should approach him in prayer for these things.
Yeah, that's just it with what we are called to pray for our leaders. And nothing precludes us also from writing to them too, if possible, or speaking to them. But we need to pray in that if there's going to be any heart change, it comes from God. There needs to be a circumcision of the heart, as much as for Trump as Biden or whoever. We all need to repent and believe in our one true King, Christ Jesus. And it's for the sake of not just our political or societal well-being, whereas though there are, let's just put it in terms of net effects, if you do have godly leaders, godly administrations, it doesn't guarantee a blessing in the country per se, but it is more likely that there's fruit and prosperity in a country which follows after the Lord in his ways. But the fact is that man needs to repent and have an eternal salvation before it's too late. And Biden isn't a spring chicken. Trump isn't that far behind. Especially while we see Biden's cognitive functions declining faster and faster. He needs to come to a real knowledge of the Lord. He is a professing Roman Catholic, a very, very liberal one in the first place, but he is in the Romanist system. He needs to repent and walk in the statutes of the Lord, whether he's president or not, while he still has his mind and life.
Yeah, and we should pray towards those ends. We do it in our church every Sunday. I lead us in prayer that, we would be justly governed according to God's will as expressed in his law. And then I pray also that our leaders would bow the knee to the King of Kings and Lord of Lords and worship him. And we all need to be praying that regularly, because that is, ultimately the things that matter the most in this discussion.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, I think that's all the time we have. We hope that this was edifying and of good use, and especially, again, not just to those in the United States, whereas, of course, this was geared more towards that. Nonetheless, these same truths and principles might apply elsewhere. I believe that these are the natures of our convictions, where they are transferable in different contexts. I would hope that we would hold to something of these same thoughts in other similar governmental contexts, or even in places where there's perhaps an increased threat against Christianity and a nation, in more communistic or socialistic settings and so on. Any final words, Andrew?
Well, I guess, the usual parting words. If you want to reach us and complain, you know how to do it. And if you don't, the outro will tell you. So I guess I don't need to say it here.
All right, then I guess we'll just tell Heidi to take it.
Yes, take it, Heidi.
Thank you for listening to this episode. For the latest news and updates, visit our Substack at onceforalldelivered.com, where you can also support our work with a paid subscription. You can also follow us on social media at OFAD Podcast. If you like what you have heard, leave a 5-star review where you get your podcasts, and spread the word about the show. Once for All Delivered is hosted by Andrew Smith and Caleb Castro, and produced by Andrew and Heidi Smith. A special thank you to our founding members, Eric and Kathy Hepker. We hope you will join us again next time on Once for All Delivered.